Welcome to the Online Great Books podcast, brought to you by OnlineGreatBooks.com, where we talk about the good life, the great books, great conversation, and great ideas.
Hi, this is Brett. I am the producer of the Online Great Books podcast, and today you are going to be listening to part one of two of Philip Rieff's The Triumph of the Therapeutic. And boy, am I feeling like we all made the right decision to split these shows into two parts, because this one is quite heavy, but absolutely delightful if you ask me, as both the producer and a listener. It begins with Scott and Karl talking about how they basically got pranked into reading this, and then the first hour of a very lively discussion follows from there. So be sure to check back next week for hour two. Thank you for listening, and take care.
I'm Scott Hambrick.
I'm Karl Schute.
And today on the Online Great Books podcast, we're going to read a book that Brett McKay recommended to me. And I texted him. I said, "Why did you recommend this to me?" He said, "I wanted to hear you rant about it." So he didn't recommend it to me because I would like it.
With friends like that.
Well, he's the one that turned me on to Wendell Berry. So I thought I could trust him.
He suckered you. This was the bait on the hook, and you swam up and you grabbed it and it hooked you.
So today we're discussing, having read the 40th anniversary edition of The Triumph of the Therapeutic, Uses of Faith After Freud by one Philip Rieff, R-I-E-F-F. The book was written, doggone it, 1966, I believe. I thought that this was kind of like Nietzsche. Like, keen observer, gets all the problems right, and I don't like that.
All the problems right, no solutions?
No solutions. This is not the feel-good book of the century. But before we get into this thing, you and I had talked about the next book is going to be the first Hardy Boys novel, which Karl has never read. It's very upsetting. You never even read it when you were like 8?
No, I read Tom Swift.
Well,
not Hardy Boys.
Yeah, so we're going to read The Tower Treasure by the Hardy Boys, and not by the Hardy Boys, about the Hardy Boys.
Who is the mythical author of the Hardy Boys?
Well, the book says it's Franklin W. Dixon, but it's Leslie McFarlane, a Canadian.
Okay.
Who was paid $85 a piece to write those during the Great Depression, and also wrote the first handful of the Nancy Drew mysteries. The reason I'm a conspiracy theorist is that once I was an adult, I found out that there was no Franklin W. Dixon, and I'm like, oh my God. Nothing is as it seems.
Who was the Tom Swift writer? Victor or something or other?
I don't know.
I don't think he's real either. Victor Appleton?
See what they did to us?
Nothing was real. Everything was fake. You know why I'm a conspiracy theorist?
Why?
Because there are conspiracies.
I know. I conspire all the time to try to get people to read these great books. To get my kids to not be awful. Like, why wouldn't people conspire to do, grander things than that? I would.
I was chatting with a guy at the gym a couple of weeks ago, and I mentioned something that I had heard that was conspiracy-ish. And then I looked it up, in the mainstream. And it turns out to be true. And I told him I had to look it up. I had to check myself. And he was laughing at me for being self-aware enough to check my conspiracy-minded theories. Well, yeah, you have to know. I mean, if you're the sort that is a little bit paranoid and sees around the corners, we need people like you, just like you need a guard dog.
Yeah.
Okay?
It makes me feel better.
You might have some false positives. Okay? There are going to be some things you think are going on that aren't really going on. You won't have any false negatives. You'll fewer of those. You'll pick up on most of what's going on, but sometimes you're going to be a little bit off. And so you need to know this about yourself. If this is your personality, have somebody you can talk to and say, am I crazy on this one? So I probably shouldn't talk to Scott about these sorts of things to see if I'm crazy about it, because he's going to say, nope, you're not crazy. Absolutely, that's true.
Carl's like, there's this Operation Paperclip. I'm like, yeah, that's right. And then he's like, hey, there's this MK Ultra thing. I'm like, yeah, that's right. And he's like, oh, there's the Gulf of Tonkin thing. I'm like, yeah, that's right. And then he's like, just Jackson Pollock guy, he was getting paid. I'm like, yeah, he's an op. Like, it just goes on and on and on. He's like, did you know that Franklin W. Dixon wasn't a guy? And I'm like, no, they lied to me.
Were you mad as hell and you're not going to take it anymore?
I'm fed up with it.
I'm looking up Tom Swift right now.
Hardy Boys gave me so much pleasure, though. They did.
Yeah, so did Tom Swift. He had rockets and Tom Swift and his giant telescope. The books were published under the pseudonym Victor Appleton, but it was Edward Stratemeyer and Howard Garris.
That's crazy. The first Hardy Boys book is 1927, I believe. It's pretty crazy. We'll read that, but we got this damn thing in front of us right now. Philip Rieff's The Triumph of the Therapeutic. Karl, this thing wore me smooth out. I think that I will... I'll let me see if I can state his thesis. This is a difficult book. I kind of liken this to Alasdair MacIntyre's After Virtue.
Mm-hmm.
It's difficult like that, and it's important like that. There aren't a lot of these new books that I think are that important. I actually think this is important as much as I hate it. I mean, he uses words like propadeutics and stuff like that. I'm like, knock that off. His thesis, let me see if I can get it, is that societies need institutions that perform therapeutic purposes or services. Religion had once done that by helping explain the nature of evil in order to, help people come to terms with their suffering. But since Freud, there has been a move away from a description and understanding of the nature of evil into trying to resolve disparate parts of one's own personality and bring them into quote-unquote harmony with themselves, that they may have a pleasurable life.
Mm-hmm.
And that now the therapist is a neo-priest.
Yeah, except there's no religion.
Well, it's the religion of the self. Does that sound right? Did I miss anything there?
No, it's pretty much right. Probably we need also to figure out what he means by a culture. So this is page 2. A culture survives principally, I think, by the power of its institutions to bind and loose men in the conduct of their affairs with reasons which sink so deep into the self that they become commonly and implicitly understood.
Yes.
With that understanding of which explicit belief and precise knowledge of externals would show outwardly like the tip of an iceberg. I don't think I need to read the last bit of that. So a culture would be, it's got permissions and restrictions. Things you can do, things you can't do, at the service of some cultural goal. That would be, for Christianity, would be salvation. For somebody else, it might be something different. For the service of the revolution, or for the spreading of Greater China. I don't know. So you have your culture has a goal, and it has things that are allowed and things that are not allowed. You can't be a drunk or a child molester because these things are not allowed, because it's not conducive to the goal. The problem that he saw in 1966 was that we don't have these positive, I think he calls them positive communities anymore. It's all dead. I think he thinks it died in 1914. It's all dead. No, that was D.H. Lawrence thought it died in 1914. God is dead. And you don't have those options anymore. Nobody would take it seriously. So what can you do? Well, you have Freud, and Freud is an atheist therapist whose therapy is to get rid of your hang-ups, to get rid of your bindings, to get rid of those last bits of the cultural bindings that make your life miserable.
I said on a show, I don't know, not too terribly long ago, that I thought we needed a new psychology because it has been, since Freud, psychology has been about overcoming repressions and resolving these hang-ups. And I'm like, well, what's repressed at this point?
Nothing.
Right. I mean, maybe in this community or that community, maybe, the potty training is weird in the Amish community, whatever. But by and large, our psychology can no longer be about repression. I think Brett heard me say that, and that's why he recommended this book for the show.
Mm-hmm.
So Freud was about resolving these internal tensions that result from repressions of what he saw as natural impulses, perhaps.
But Freud doesn't have any particular thing to say about how you ought to live. So let me give an example. Yesterday I was up in the city and I did what people in my positive community, which is still there even though it's kind of on hard times, is what we do. So there's a church up there on the northwest side that has something called confession on Wednesday afternoons at 3.
Mm-hmm.
All right. It's neat because I start work at the gym at 4, so I can go, and if I'm feeling that I've done something that I shouldn't have done, I have some of these hang-ups, Freudian hang-ups, well, I can do what for 2,000 years people did, which is you go, you find your appointed person who is a member of the clerical order, laid on with apostolic succession, and you go in there and you tell him what you did, and he says prayers that are supposed to absolve you, and then you go do penance and you're supposed to feel better. So there it is, your release. That's the binding and loosing. And the hope is that there is salvation at the end of that, they're not just magic, they're not just words that the priest is saying, but there's something that actually does something. Okay? Other cultures have different ways to do this. Day of Atonement, Ramadan. I don't know too much about Islam. I know they have some sort of thing when they get rid of past troubles. I'm sure the Hindus have something. They have a way to do this. What if you no longer believe that this is real? So if I completely lost my faith, would I go to that little church on Wednesdays at 3 p.m. and mumble my sins to a guy in a box? It would have no more power, would it?
Does man need that? So all these different traditions have some way to expiate these things. So before we get to the question of, whether it works if you don't believe it, or, however you just pose that, is that a human necessity? Like, do we need that?
I bet we do. I think we do.
I think we do. So if that's destroyed, like you said, or that faith chunk is taken out of it, then you ask, if you go talk to the man in the little box, and you don't think it works anymore, then
Yeah. Well, so why would I do it? But I would still be doing things that were wrong, I guess, and I might still feel guilty about it, but I wouldn't have any way to expiate the guilt. Okay, so
enter Freud.
So here's Freud, and Freud would say, "Tell me about your mother."
Yeah, it's not your fault. Your mom potty trained you extra harshly, and now, whatever.
Yeah, we need to get rid of your feelings of guilt. Okay, we don't need to amend my behavior so much, except insofar as I want to. But we need to get rid of the guilt of the things that are binding you up. Whereas the priest promises salvation, the therapist promises being well-adjusted, which might be all you can do if you don't have, as Jung called it, the God term, which I think Rieff is probably on board with that. I think he's seeing what he's seeing. All there is therapy now.
Yeah, that's the title of the book, The Triumph of the Therapeutic.
Yeah, we're a secular outfit. Online Great Books is secular. But sometimes members like to talk about stuff. And so somebody posted something about, how do you find a good church? And I was worried about that thread. I thought it was going to get nasty, but it didn't. Everybody was nice. But somebody said, well, what I do is I look for a church that preaches everything I believe. I think that's a therapeutic approach, where you look for the place where you'll feel comfortable. I would have said, find the thing that you think's the true church and then believe what they believe. I think the therapeutic approach is, I'm not going to go to this organization because they have anything of capital T truth to tell me. I'm going to go to this organization because they make me feel better. Or they confirm me in the things I already kind of believe. It's all therapy all the way down.
Isn't it all about making you feel better?
I suppose it's better to feel, well, I don't know. Is it always good to feel good?
Well, back to the Gorgias. It's flattery. If you go to therapy and you're a scoundrel and you hang out at the bicycle racks at the elementary school trying to ambush little kids, the therapist makes you feel better about that. I mean, it's flattery. It's not improving to the soul or the individual. But, you know, I just got done reading Plato's Gorgias again. I hadn't read it. Every time I read it, I write the date on the last page. Last time I read it was in July of 2018. He says that rulers and governments should serve to improve the people. He says that they should serve to improve the people and not be confectioners and just give them sweets and make them fat. You know, does therapy actually serve to improve the people? That's not Freud's project.
Pure Freudian therapy wouldn't.
Right. Later, Jung and others maybe try. Maybe.
Well, Jordan Peterson, I don't think he's Freudian. No, I think he's one of these others.
Yeah.
Attempting to put something in, getting ahead of ourselves, but attempting to put something in where the God term would be. Mm-hmm. Because that's part of the problem with Freudianism, with pure therapy, is that I can help you through the talking. I can help you not be bound up. I can help you be well adjusted. But then what should you actually do with your life?
Right. Well adjusted to what? I mean, the adjustment idea. I'm not a Freud scholar here, but I've read some. Actually, I did a show with Dr. David Pewter, psychiatrist, about Freud back earlier in the catalog before Karl and I started doing this show here. Go back and listen to that. But that idea of adjustment implies the Freudian conception of the soul is that the soul has many parts, and that those parts need to be adjusted and be able to, you know, exist in harmony and without conflict inside the person, and then that person can be who they need to be without experiencing continued damage from repression and so on. This made me want to go read some Freud and see if I could figure out what he saw as a soul. Or maybe he doesn't. But if he doesn't think there's a soul, like, what is he adjusting? What's going on here? Like, I think he and I are at metaphysical loggerheads. And I think he's wrong. And then you end up with this whole therapeutic paradigm. So our good friend Aristotle says our soul it's one thing, it's one chunk, but it has appetites. The nutritive, the motive. I'm not appetites. It has motives, right? There's things. So you move. You have appetites for nutrition, and so on, that cause the soul to make the body move. Am I wrong about this, Karl?
No.
But the soul is one thing. But then, if you act virtuously, you're able to take these motives and act appropriately at the right time according to the right measure, and so on.
But there's a governing motive above them all, which in Aristotle you see, he says somewhere, I need to find the quote, and this is where the metaphysics makes sense. Okay, and it does change your behavior. This is to another commentator on our Slack channel who asked what good the metaphysics did. Anybody? That whole theory of the unmoved mover, it's the way Aristotelian therapy would be not merely therapeutic, but salvific. Mm-hmm. Because all things strive for the eternal. Aristotle says somewhere, this is why the bunny rabbits, he doesn't say bunny rabbits, but this is why they make babies so much. Because it's by making babies that they participate in the eternal. So there is a desire of the soul towards what Aristotle would consider the higher things that gives a shape to the whole thing. So if I were to go to Dr. Aristotle for my therapy and say, well, Dr. Aristotle, I've got some problems because of the potty training, and, I have some complexes and that Oedipus thing, and Aristotle would say, very good, but how are you doing with the unmoved mover?
Right. Yeah. Have you identified the higher thing? What do you do every single day to habituate yourself towards that higher thing? It requires something of you.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's the difference. And if you don't have that, if we've erased that for whatever reasons, the 20th century is the most bloody and violent century that humans have ever had so far, by a lot. It did an awful lot to, I think, probably to destroy the faith of Europe. Well, that absolutely destroyed the faith of Europe and most of the rest of the world. If you don't have that, what do you have left? So we ought to get some quotes from Philip here.
Yeah, you said it destroyed the faith of Europe. On page 9, he says that faith is that governor inclined always to be censorious about novelty. We call that faith. Faith is the compulsive dynamic of culture channeling obedience to, trust in, and dependence upon authority. So he goes on a little bit more about that. But faith is sort of the, I'm going to say this even though somebody's going to pick up on it and beat me up with it, the sort of cage that we're in that protects us from novelty. It bounds our behavior, and the faith limits the number of potential actions that you will consider in the face of novelty.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I said cage. I didn't want to say cage because, Sam Harris is like, see? But, the shark cage keeps the sharks from eating your ass.
Yeah, well, he calls it a censor, and the sentence before the one you quoted, in every culture there stands a censor governing the opportunity of recognizing and responding to novel stimuli. A censor. Censor was a job in the Roman Republic. The censor was kind of the guardian of public morals. He kept the list of people in the Senate and would exclude people if they, had become degenerate. Nobody likes censorship, except how do you have a culture when there's nothing that's not permitted?
Right.
Wait, did I say that right?
Yeah.
When you have nothing that, when there's nothing off limits, you don't have a culture.
But
you need a censor.
What if, this is supposed to be for the end of the show, but I'm going to go ahead and do it now, and then we can just wrap up. What if there are entirely new categories of action that are off limits, and there is a new censor?
Yeah.
There are a huge list of words that we can only list by the first letter of the word.
So the structure of the book, if you look at the table of contents, which I'm going to do right now, we have sort of sets the stage with Freud, and then we have talking about Jung, and then Reich, and then D.H. Lawrence. Reich was a weird cat.
D.H. Lawrence is a degenerate, P.O.S.
Yes. So 5, 6, and 7 of the book are therapists, people in the Freudian tradition who have found it lacking because there's no God term. There's nowhere to go. And so you have Jungian archetypes or Reichian Freudo-Marxism, sex magic, or D.H. Lawrence, where it's just the sex magic, trying to find a guiding principle. And we have people trying to do that now. So the therapeutic has... People are trying to do that now. There are, I'll just say it. There are new religions.
Yeah.
Because we have to have one.
Just read Protagoras and Gorgias. He says that we always act believing that we're aiming for the good. And then when we act improperly, it's because we have an incomplete understanding of either the consequences of that thing that we do, or we have an incomplete understanding of what the good is. But he believes that people act in good faith, essentially. The example that my friend Karl gives is that people don't smoke because they want some cancer. They smoke because the nicotine is beneficial and it's soothing to them in some way, and so on. They're seeking those good things about smoking, not the tumors.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's probably right. So these sort of new religions, I think, are trying to seek out some good, but they don't understand. They know not what they do. Environmentalism, well, is the earth itself a good? Is that the highest? I don't know. They'll have to explain that to me. I just got done reading Can Life Prevail by Pentti Linkola. Extreme environmentalist. There is no number of people that he wouldn't be willing to kill to make the planet, quote unquote, healthier. The total set of people minus one is how many he would be willing to kill to make the planet. I'm serious. There are people who want to protect the feelings of others, such that if you say certain words about those people, there's nothing they wouldn't do to punish you.
Yeah, I was thinking about this too. So we're kind of doing the end of the podcast very close to the beginning. And then maybe we'll do the middle and then the beginning at the end.
Sounds good.
So the new religions that are popping up, and I don't really want to name them because it gets awfully political, but dear listener, you know what we're talking about, or you've seen them around. All of these, there are permitted behaviors and forbidden behaviors, and you dare not question. Okay, that's kind of like a religion. The difference is what I would consider a genuine religion has a prophet. It has a charismatic figure. It has a Moses. It has a Jesus. It has, I guess, a Joseph Smith. You know, it has somebody that is the archetype, that is inspirational. And the new religions, they don't have this. They're just sort of arising from everywhere, it seems. They're like cockroaches out of the floor. You're not sure where they're coming from. I think there's a problem for them taking hold. And I always quote Heidegger on this. Heidegger says only a God can save us. Nietzsche says pretty much the same thing. These are not Übermenschen that are doing this. They're Untermenschen. So I'm not too excited about their prospects to grab hold of the earth and be the new religion. I mean, I think we have good religions that we left behind, frankly, but I don't want to name names because I don't want to be political. But, you know, certain politicians who go by 3-letter acronyms, is that your new prophet? Can she bear the load? I don't think so.
Henry Cabot Lodge? Is that what you're talking about?
No.
I, for one, welcome our pantsuit mommies.
I'd rather have alien overlords.
Illegal alien overlords?
Anyway, so a lot of what's good and what's interesting in this is the talk about culture. And this is where, if you have read Alistair MacIntyre, this would have been a good thing to read first, if you could manage it. All the stuff about culture. Culture is another name for a design of motives directing the self outward toward those communal purposes in which alone the self can be realized and satisfied. That's on page 3. This thought of culture as being remissions and permissions directed towards some kind of cultural end. That's pretty interesting to me. It makes me think, do we have one?
Oh, do we have a culture?
Yeah.
Yeah, we do. So let's be political. No. Yes. Like, there are remissions, or I'm sorry, what do they call them? Permissions and remissions. What are his terms? I've already forgotten.
I don't know. What does he say?
There are. They're just different than they were in 1983, Karl. Like, you can go down to the HR department and they'll tell you what they are. You know, you could let your freak flag fly and be into butt stuff or whatever, but you can't say these words. You know, there are permissions.
Yeah, and it's coming from nowhere and everywhere.
Well, yeah, it's coming from your pantsuit mommies in HR. They'll tell you. No, I mean.
No. It's coming from everywhere.
I hear you.
It's a culture that is seeping in. If you were in the 7th century and you see this new thing coming out of the Arabian Peninsula, you can point to where it started. You know who started it. You could even maybe get the book.
And when you have faith as a guardian, on page 11, he says that new experience was not wanted. Like that, the faith told you, you know, what proper experience was, and would help you guard against novelty. And we don't have it. I hate this because the boomers like snicker at it and then lose. By the way, Karl, you and I did a little Instagram live this morning, and before you got on there, our listener to this show, Dre the Poet, he's like, I thought you were a boomer. Did you see that?
How dare you, sir? I did not see that comment. I'm closer to boomer than...
I apparently have not come out strongly enough in my anti-boomer stances, and I'm going to have to make sure that
I don't know how he missed it.
that I make this more clear. You know, you say it's coming up out of the soil or like seeping in like groundwater or whatever. This culture of the therapeutic is about being at peace with your weird shit. I mean, that's what it is. And that comes from Freud. You know, he says that your psychological problems and frankly, human pain, the problem of being human, comes from our inability to deal with unresolved tensions because of our weird stuff, which I think is related to the fall of man, and we're born with, and there ain't nothing we can do about it. But he doesn't agree. So, if everybody has their weird stuff, and the way to quote-unquote Freudian salvation is to be at peace with that, anyone that disturbs your peace about your weird stuff has to be destroyed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you can't really be a universal peace. I want to grab a juicy quote from Professor Rieff here on page 10. By this time, men may have gone too far, beyond the old deception of good and evil, to specialize at last wittingly in techniques that are to be called in the present volume therapeutic, with nothing at stake beyond a manipulatable sense of well-being. This is the unreligion of the age and its master science. Okay, so you won. Boomers. It's probably the generation before the boomers, actually.
It is.
But you won, okay? You get to do whatever you want, and nobody's going to have a problem with it, except that that's not true, because people will have problems with it, because your desires are going to conflict. But nevertheless, you won. Now, what do you do with your life? Well, whatever you want. Well, what should I want?
It's freak flags all the way down, bro.
It's nihilism. There's nothing that's worth anything. You'd be a well-adjusted zero.
Just below that, where you said that on page 10, I have here, the systematic hunting down of all settled convictions represents the anti-cultural predicate upon which modern personality is being organized. He's right. Modern personality is organized on an anti-cultural predicate. If there are cultural norms, both repressions and I keep forgetting his terms there. Permissions and repressions. Modern personality is predicated on a rejection of those things.
Used to be. So that's where I think you're right. That things are changing, where now there's very clear orthodoxies, there's very clear permissions and remissions that we have.
Yeah, in 1966, it was more up in the air, I guess.
I mean, there's a reason I don't have a Facebook account.
Does Facebook kick you off, bro?
No, I didn't get kicked off. I left before they could kick me off. Well, I didn't want to make an offhand...
You can't fire me. I quit.
I didn't want to... Yeah. I didn't want to make an offhand comment in somebody's post and then have it be ammunition against me.
Right.
Better to just leave and not say anything. And, of course, you know, the hours of podcasting we do is kind of counterproductive to that
I know.
goal. But it's dangerous out there to run afoul of... So, for the record, for anyone who's listening, whatever it is that is the dominant way of thinking right now, I completely agree. You're right.
I agree, and I lost everything I own in a boating accident.
Yeah, so I'm inoffensive. I don't have any opinions on anything, as far as you know. So I think we have not stayed in the boomer Freudian state.
We've moved past it, huh?
Yeah. And so he starts the whole thing with the Yeats poem, or is it Yeats? I think it's Yeats.
Yeats.
What rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born. Well, something's coming. What's coming? Something else.
Babylon.
Yeah, well, something. I mean, You're going to have a culture with permissions and remissions. You're going to have a culture with a belief system. What's it going to be?
Almost every time somebody says so and then states my view, they're making shit up. But I'm going to do that.
So what you're saying is...
So what you're saying, Karl, is that mankind cannot operate without repressions and permissions.
Right.
These sets of beliefs that are pro these things and against those things.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
Mankind cannot exist with a in full permissiveness.
Yeah. Or put it another way, humans are naturally religious. Religious, I'm going to use Aquinas' etymology on this. Religio, to bind back, to tie down. Whether it's, Zoroastrianism or Shinto or something, there's going to be something. Living without it, it's not going to, you might last for 10 years without it. But then you're going to start raising up a whole bunch of little prophets who will start saying what you can say and what you can't say and what you can do and what you can't do.
Yeah. Like Greta. How dare you? How dare you?
I don't know who Greta is. I'm not sure who you're talking about. I have no knowledge of anything or strong beliefs.
So here's a little jab at conservatives, Karl. Page 12. Page 12.
Are we going to get past page 20 in this?
Nah. Current apologetic efforts by religious professionals in pretending that renunciation as the general mode of control was never dominant in the system reflect a strange mixture of cowardice and courage with which they are participating in the dissolution of their cultural functions.
Yeah, I've seen that happen.
I have too.
Because I do somewhat regularly go into that little box. And I have done it in all kinds of dioceses and churches and the various places I've lived in the United States. There's a whole lot of times where I am told that whatever it is I was doing, that's not sinful. The church has moved beyond that. Just feel good about yourself. And then I would bring the catechism in and say, nope, it says right here.
Karl's like, no, I'm a screw up. Listen to me.
Right. Confessional lawyer.
Right.
There's definitely a strong strand of that in my church in particular, where a lot of people are just told, you're fine. You're fine. We're not into that much anymore. Well, if that's the case, then what are you into? Yeah, so he's right. He's not a believer at all. He's absolutely right about the nature of what, at least what Christianity was.
Yeah. So right here, he's talking about apologetic efforts by religious professionals, but I also see it as the political supposed conservative. He says, I'll read it again, and pretending the renunciation as the general mode of control was never dominant in the system. Well, Buckley did that to us. He's like, oh, no, it's about the Enlightenment. It's about classical liberalism, and it's essentially about permissivism. It's and then they talk about Locke says, well, your rights end where another's begin, and then you can just make up where yours begin and the other one. I mean, it's permissiveness. That's what it's become. Conservatism has been ultimately about permissiveness. As long as you don't screw with somebody's property rights, butt stuff, whatever, man. Come on. It's the Enlightenment. And they pretend like the right did not exercise a modus of control where they said this is okay and this is not okay. And they used to do that.
They used to do that. The right used to be the monarchists.
Right. Closed borders, on and on and on. A huge list of prohibitions and a small list of permissions.
Mm-hmm.
And now they act, well, Buckley, some sort of weird crypto homo has redefined, what it is. And then everybody wonders why it doesn't work. Well, he tells you right here. Poor Karl. I don't believe anything I say. It's all theater. It's infotainment, Karl. I don't believe anything. I have no beliefs. The only thing I believe for sure is you shouldn't use the N-word. That's the only thing I believe for real.
That's that commandment 1?
Yes. Nutella. That's it.
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing with you.
Can I read a sample of how awful his writing is?
Sure.
Behave like your savior, Christian, he says. Christian culture, like other organizations of moral demand, operated, however imperfectly, through the internalization of a soteriological character ideal carrying tremendous potentials for fresh intakes of communal energy, semicolon, the highest levels of controls and remissions, parens, which together organize systems of moral demands, in parentheses, experienced the historical and individualized incarnation. Such ehumerist processes may have been indispensable to the vitality of the old culture. I mean, he just goes on and on and on like this with this stuff. It's brutal.
What? Wait, that wasn't clear to you?
To adjust the expression of impulses to the controlling paragon or character ideal defines the primary process in the shaping of our inherited culture. Good Lord.
All right, let me sum that up. Okay? Religions, in this case Christianity, had saints that were exemplars of how you ought to live.
Right.
And also, because it is soteriological, that's a fancy word meaning it offered salvation. Whatever that means.
Right.
Okay? For Christians, it's happy afterlife. Heck, you could do it as a Buddhist, but in that case, it's a happy non-life. I mean, it's happy nothingness at the end. But it offers something. And because it offers something, more than just being well-adjusted, through the ages, it can pop up with great energy. So you will have the degeneracy of the 12th century, and then you have Francis and Dominic pop up in the Roman Church. And soon, all the young people want to become friars. Is it because they were becoming well-adjusted? No, Francis was not well-adjusted. Francis would throw himself into thorn bushes when he was feeling tempted.
Solid.
But what Francis talked about was salvation. And so that was inspirational to people, and that's why he was able to save the Catholic Church in the West, for good or for ill, I think for good, in the 12th century.
So you require something with a soteriological character and a euhemerist process in order to get...
What was that word you keep saying?
Euhemerist, Euhemerist. You require that in order to get this imaginary pendulum to swing back to the right, like all the conservatives are waiting on, right?
Okay, so imagine, Francis, I don't know which page you're on anyway. What page are you on?
Page 12.
Oh, there it is.
Just
a little bit.
Euhemerism, Karl. Interpretation of myths as traditional accounts of historical persons and events.
Okay, so everybody knows Francis of Assisi. You might have statues of him around your neighborhood for the birds to poop on. Imagine that he came, and instead of preaching pretty standard Christian gospel stuff, he preached Freudianism. Come and get your hang-ups removed. Just come sit on this couch and talk with me for a while, and we'll remove your hang-ups. So be St. Francis of Freud.
Come here and sit by me, Carmades.
So, you're making me laugh. And so Francis does this, and, it might work for one generation. Okay, so maybe he's got that one generation, all these people who would have been Franciscans are now well-adjusted Freudians. But in doing so, he would destroy the conditions of his own success for the next generation, because it would evacuate all of that soteriological character, that salvation stuff. And so the next generation would say, I'm already well-adjusted, everything's already permitted. I don't need you. So therapy could last maybe a generation. But after that, why am I doing this? What is the point of my life? So therapy leads to nihilism. This is my reading of it. And so my hypothetical St. Francis would not have a Franciscan order that's lasted 800 years. He would have 20 years. And then everybody would just kind of drift away and then wouldn't know what to do with themselves.
You think Rieff's saying that all of this leads to a nihilism?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know that he's got a way out.
I read that he thinks it comes to a radical, like, self-worship, where the self is the highest ideal.
Yeah, but is that a good thing? I don't think he's saying that's a good thing. This is the thing that's slouching towards Bethlehem to be born, but it's not nice.
Yeah, but it's not nihilism. This is all I'm saying.
Well, tomato.
Well, I hear you. Yeah, I mean, look at all the selfies. Like, what are people doing? Seriously, they're like their own golden calf.
Desperately trying to convince themselves that they are a self.
Ooh.
Let me get
Ouch.
Kierkegaardian on you. Or Walker Persian.
13. Our culture has shifted towards a predicate of impulse release. Difficult as the modern cultural condition may be, I doubt that Western man can be persuaded again to the Greek opinion that the secret of happiness is to have as few needs as possible. I think the veil slips right there. I think that's where Rieff is on this. He doesn't then turn around and deuce on that idea. He's not one to spare words. If he feels like there's something that needs to be said about it, he would have said it.
Well, that fits into what I know of the very little I know of his biography. He retreats, doesn't really write much, doesn't make much of the fame that he could have had.
You know, I love me some Thoreau.
Yes.
And I think that Thoreau is an old Roundhead. Like, he's a Puritan, even though he's not a heavy-duty Protestant like you might think. You know, he's not the guy running the dunking stool. I think he is a sort of Puritan Roundhead aesthetic. And he says the man who owns little is little owned. And there is sort of a Yankee frugality that comes out of that. You know, is that Greek, you think? Or is that rooted in the body is base and the sort of, sensual pleasures that come from, rich food and sumptuous upholstery and all that corrupt because it serves the body? I
think putting it in terms of being little owned is Greek. I think a Christian reading of that would be a little bit different if we ever read The Rule of St. Benedict. Which we ought to do at some point.
Yeah, I agree.
Just even as a management manual. Yeah. The reason you give up everything is to obey better. It's for your salvation. So, and I don't think Thoreau puts it in that way, but Thoreau puts it more like Epicurus would have put it. Be wary of your pleasures. Yeah, pleasure's the highest good, but be careful of them. Mm-hmm. Yes, it's more pragmatic. It's not promising you, if you get rid of everything, then you'll be first in heaven.
Right.
That's a different way of saying the problem.
Yeah, the secret of happiness, the Greek opinion that the secret of happiness is to have as few needs as possible. Okay, so my mind immediately goes to new automobiles or something, sort of material things. But before that, though, he says that individuality in the Christian culture was hedged round by the discipline of sexuality. So I think for Rieff here, it's not necessarily material needs. It's you want to hedge around, all of those needs. Or he sees that pre-Freudian Christian culture hedged around all of those needs. And I made a note here in the margin and it says, does abstinence increase the ability to resist all impulse? I think so. That's a big theme for Rieff here, is that Christianity's chief control was over sexuality. And then from that radiated all other controls that were in fact beneficial.
Yeah, I would need to see more of his argument on that. This is one of those throwaway lines in the book. MacIntyre said something about this, that, on the back cover. This is one of incidental remarks that MacIntyre says are not only illuminating in themselves, they suggest whole new areas of inquiry.
It was just his very kindly way of saying, you didn't put a bow on this, Bubba.
I met Alistair MacIntyre. He was very nice. Shorter than I thought. From reading his books, I thought he was taller.
Right.
Does that make sense?
He's a giant of a man. 5'2".
Yeah. Yeah.
Christian asceticism, at least so far as that it was not influenced by decadent Hellenistic philosophy, had as its purpose not the suppression or even extirpation of natural drives, but rather their control and complete spiritualization. It is positive asceticism, aimed fundamentally at liberation of the highest powers of personality from blockage by the automatism of the lower drives. That's actually a quote from Max Scheler.
I'll throw something else on our infinity stack. When we read Genealogy of Morals, at least the first essay.
Yeah, I want to.
This is an argument that Nietzsche makes. It's actually, he doesn't like it, but it's a great achievement of Christianity, was the turning in of the urges upon the self to allow you to do greater things.
Yeah, well, and even Freud tries to do that too. Like Freud has a little German idealism in him as well, but he wants you to sublimate these urges into other energies that can then, propel your industriousness or whatever.
Or do whatever, be well adjusted. For what though, Sigmund? Did you ever see, what is it, Bill and Ted? What is the name of that movie?
Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, yeah.
Yeah, and they pick up Sigmund Freud, and he's sitting in the mall eating a corn dog.
Yes, so dumb.
I love that movie.
The elites of the emergent culture, if they do not destroy themselves and all culture with a dynamism they appear unable to control, are being trained in terminologies that have only the most tenuous relation to any historic culture and its incorporative self-interpretations. Why use a few words when a whole lot will do, right? Right, Philip? So Hambrick's paraphrase there is that critical theory and cultural Marxism will devour itself.
Yeah, it might, but what comes after?
A smoking hole.
Yeah, look at top of 19. I'm going to move us on like 3 pages. This 250-page book.
We're in the introduction. We haven't even got chapter 1 yet.
Yeah, it's already an hour in. Just a nice summary here. The whole paragraph is good, but the top of 19, religious man was born to be saved. Psychological man is born to be pleased. Yep. The difference was established long ago. When I believe, the cry of the ascetic lost precedence to one feels, the caveat of the therapeutic. So this is where he thinks we were in 1966. And we were for a long time. I don't know that we're still there.
Oh, listen. I had this underlined as well. I mean, this is a crucial little passage, I think, in the book. Psychological man is born to be pleased. Therapeutic culture seeks to serve that purpose, to please the psychological man. One feels. We talk about it all the time. People talk about it all the time. The feels.
Mm-hmm.
It's uncanny. Nobody even had a vocabulary for anything like the feels.
I can't imagine my grandfather ever saying the word feel.
The feels. And here's why it's bad. John Wayne, I'm sure, had things that he held in high value and high esteem that would move him to emotional display from time to time. And that emotional display would be as a result of experiencing these things that he valued a great deal. Right? Like the emotional outburst or the emotional display had a direct relationship with what the man held to be high or low. Right? The murder of a child might make him cry, or to see a champion take a victory lap after enormous effort and struggle. Like maybe those things could make me cry. It's not the feels. The feels is amorphous and doesn't mean anything. These emotional outpourings, when you talk about it in terms of the feels, it's just an experiential thing. Like it's just emotional vomit. Ugh.
Imagine asking Julius Caesar, how do you feel?
It's like all these knives in my back. I feel like shit.
No, I mean before that. But there he is conquering Gaul. And you say, so, Julius, how do you feel? He would probably answer you. He would say, we did really well against that tribe yesterday. Okay, we accomplished this goal. I have a camp being built over there, and we're building a bridge over there. Be like, yeah, but how do you feel?
Now, see, I proposed just now that John Wayne would have emotional reactions to certain things that he held in either very high or very low value. You just said, so what you're saying, Karl, is that Caesar would not have had those reactions.
Well, he might have, but he wouldn't have ever stopped, I don't think. He never did in the writing that I've read, and say, well, I feel. I don't think the internal would be much of a direction for him.
I agree, and I wonder if the modern period that starts at, I don't know, the 1540s or something like that, started to change people's internal monologues, like to change people's own experience of themselves.
I've heard, and it might have been you who argued it.
I think it's Shakespeare's fault.
Yeah,
like
then it was
Shakespeare, his people would get up in front of the groundlings at the Globe Theater and model neuroticism for those fucking people. I mean, that's what it is. To be or not to be, all this hand wringing. Like, there's virtuous action to be had or not had in front of you, and he's like, they get up there and model neuroticism for these people, and then they, so you're on the stage. They're on the stage in front of all these people, which is like a social proof. And then he's the star of the show, and he just models neuroticism for all these people in London. And then the author of all this neuroticism is like held in high regard. He's famous. He's Shakespeare, for crying out loud. I mean, it became esteemable to do that. And I think that Freud, in his work, changed the way the person experienced him or herself. He gave them a vocabulary that maybe we shouldn't have ever had.
Fine, but...
But what?
Shakespeare would not have been esteemed as he was had the soil not been ready for it.
Right. If the soil hadn't been ready, his entire project would have seemed like schizophrenic babbling.
Yeah, if you compare his stuff to the mystery plays from 200 years before, it's completely different.
Right.
You couldn't put on Shakespeare in 1380.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you read Chaucer, and it's nothing at all the same. So, maybe he didn't cause it. But he legitimized it and modeled it. Stupid Enlightenment.